Well, good morning. Welcome to Creek's Inn this morning. Last Sunday of October. Guess what next week is? Extra hour of sleep. Yes, don't forget. Don't forget. Set those clocks back. Get your extra hour of sleep, or else you'll get here early, right? Well, welcome if you're watching our live stream. And we are starting a brand new series today of all things called Monsters. Now, this is the time of year when people think about monsters. Kids think about them, kids dress up like them. So I thought, why not take advantage of this time of the year and start talking about some spiritual monsters that we face as Christ followers. And that's what we're going to do for the next 4 weeks. Now, monsters are usually, imaginary creatures that we've made up, that scare us, that are horrible, that, we've come up with all kinds of things in our imaginations. But I would tell you this, there are real monsters out there. Only a monster would walk into a synagogue and open fire and kill 11 people. That's a monster. Only a monster would make explosive devices, put them in envelopes and mail them to people. They're there. They're real. But in the spiritual realm, they are real as well. I don't know if you've ever done this, but have you ever given a gift to someone and they just kind of were indifferent about it, wrote it off? This happened to me one time. Back when I was a worship leader, we used to have Christian artists come in and do concerts. And so I had this Christian artist come in. I'm not going to say his name, but he wrote a very popular song that most everybody would know if they've been in the Christian field at all, but it even made some of the secular stations as well. And it had something to do with butterflies and kisses. So you can look that up later. But it's a very famous and popular song, done at many weddings, done at all kinds of events. And so I had this gentleman come in to do a concert for us. And I tell you what, I've been so moved by his music over the years, and I was in awe of him, but I wanted to do something for him to thank him for the impact he had on my life and on my kids' lives, because we would sing that song all the time to them. And so before the concert, I had done some shopping, and at a Christian bookstore, I found something that I thought would be really neat to give him. And it was a very expensive pen set, but it had butterflies on it and a saying, and I thought, this is perfect. And I had his name engraved on it. And so before the concert, we were in the green room, and we were talking, and I brought this gift out that I had very elegantly wrapped myself. And so I give this to him while we're talking, and he just kind of takes it and sets it down, and he keeps on talking. And I'm like, what do you mean? What are you doing? Don't you know I gave you a gift? I spent a lot of money on this gift. I chose it just for you. And what are you doing with it? Now, I hear a noise, Chris, coming from somewhere. Do y'all hear that? Okay, do we know what that is? Because I can't go on with this noise. It's a monster. Is it a guitar that needs to be unplugged, maybe? Or kill some of the instruments on the board? I hear where it's coming from. I'm going to find it. It's in the drums. Yeah, it's in the drum deal. Can you get it? It's coming within the shield. There may be a monster in there. I don't know. Okay, maybe it's gone? All right. Where was I? I was given a gift. Nope. Okay. Somebody get back here and fix that. Find it. So I give him this gift, and he kind of just sets it aside, and we keep talking. I think, well, maybe eventually he will, get back to it, open it, but he didn't. And so he did the concert, and then he packs up and he goes to the next city in the next concert. And I come in the next day into the green room, and guess what I saw? There it sat. Didn't even open it, didn't even take it with him. Now, I'm not, trying to be bad on the guy or anything like that, but that kind of hurt my feelings, as it probably would you. But he was just totally indifferent to something that I had spent, some money on, investment, time, and everything. But I think what I'm trying to get you to realize is this. When we have been given the gift of salvation, the gift of forgiveness of our sins, the fact that Jesus came to this earth, lived, died, was crucified, was terribly tortured, but he raised from the dead. And then he empowers us to live the life that we're meant to live. And if we take that and we don't even acknowledge the gift or the giver, I would imagine Jesus feels the very same way. How could we become so indifferent about what he's done for us? Okay, how are we doing on that? I'm about to go demolish the drum thing. Okay? I do not know what is going on back here. I got to find out. I think it may be the Aviom. Is there an Aviom in there that's doing that? It's coming through, I think, an Aviom in here. Unplug the Aviom back there. Ian may know what to do with it. There it goes again. You got it? That it? Got it. All right. That monster is dead. So, indifference. But I think that's how Jesus feels sometimes when we don't acknowledge the gift. Now, spiritual indifference is not new, especially to a particular generation. Those of you who were millennials, do you realize what they've called you the meh generation? Meh. What are you excited about? Meh. How's the job going? Meh. And they literally called them the indifferent meh generation. Well, in Revelation chapter 3, there was a church that was very much a part of the meh culture. And if you have a Bible and want to turn there, we're going to be in the 3rd chapter of Revelation. Jesus himself wrote 7 letters to 7 churches in Revelation. And he talks about this horrible monster of indifference. And in chapter 3, the church is called the Church of Laodicea. And I'm going to put a map on the screen so that you can kind of get a context of where this was. This was an area called Asia Minor in the 1st century. And you'll see the town of Laodicea huddled between Colossae and Hierapolis. This church, this town had been destroyed by an earthquake about 35 years before John wrote this book. But they had rebuilt, and they had rebuilt very strong. In fact, they were on a road that was a trading route from Rome. And so they had become very big into the banking industry. They were very big into the textile industry. They had a great medical community, even a school of ophthalmology in the 1st century. And the textile industry, all these things had made them kind of bounce back, and they were kind of like the modern day Dubai of today. Very international, a lot of things going on, very wealthy, all these things going on. And it was inside of this culture that Jesus spoke to this church that was in the middle of this culture that because of the success of everything that they had become a meh church spiritually. And so we're going to read through this, and we're going to listen to what Jesus had to say about this. And if anybody here have a red letter edition of the Bible? You have one of those? That means that Jesus is speaking in red, right? And it's interesting that Jesus was already dead, crucified, and already risen. But here he is, through John, writing a letter to these churches. Now, something else about this city of Laodicea. The only weakness they had was their water supply. And they built this huge aqueduct system to ship in water from 2 cities. from Colossae in the south and from Hierapolis in the north. I can hardly say the word Hierapolis without expecting a superhero. Should have been born there or something, right? Hierapolis. But anyway, Colossae was known for its cold water. And cold water is so refreshing, especially when you're thirsty. And they had to have cold water, so they shipped it through these aqueducts to Laodicea. But then on the other side, Hierapolis was known for its hot springs. And hot water is very medicinal, isn't it? Very therapeutic, and it makes a great coffee. So they have this aqueduct system that's bringing cold water from the south, hot water from the north, but the problem is by the time it gets to Laodicea, guess what? It's neither cold nor hot. It's lukewarm. It's tepid. And so for all the hard work that they did, were not able to enjoy what they wanted to enjoy, because by the time it got there, it was lukewarm. So keep that in the back of your mind as we read these scriptures. Now, before we read them, I want to just kind of give you a definition of what we're talking about of indifference. And that's this. It's the want or lack of interest or concern. Another word is apathy, or without significance. So spiritual indifference is the detrimental spiritual quality of knowing what to do, knowing what's necessary, but being unwilling to take the necessary steps in that direction. So here's our main truth for today. Write this down. Spiritual indifference robs us of intimacy with God and brings him intense displeasure. Spiritual indifference affects you. It robs you of an intimate relationship with God. But also, not only does it affect you, it affects God. It affects him. As we're going to see, it brings him intense displeasure, and that's saying it mildly. Let's read from the text in Revelation 3, verse 14. Jesus says, through John, write this letter to the angel of the church in Laodicea. Now, the angel in this sense was the pastor or the spiritual leader of this church. So he says, write these things to the letter of the church in Laodicea. This is the message from the one who is the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's new creation. Verse 15. I know all the things you do. Jesus says, I know how you're living. I know what you did this week. If you look back at your life this week, were you full of passion and energy for the things of the kingdom of God, or were you spiritually indifferent? He says, I know all the things you do, that you are neither what? Hot or cold. I wish that you were one or the other. See, both serve a purpose. He says, but you're not. He says, but since you are like lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold, now check this out, I will spit you out of my mouth. Wow. What was Jesus saying? He's telling this particular church, you're spiritually stale. You're depressingly detached. And after what I did for you, after all I've called you to do, what I've empowered you to do, you don't even seem to care. Here's what I want you to notice. When he said, I'm about to spit you out, the literal translation is, I want to vomit you. That's pretty rough, isn't it? I want to vomit you. I almost call this message making God gag. But it's serious stuff. Jesus is saying this, your spiritual indifference, church, it doesn't just break my heart, it turns my stomach. After what I did for you, dying on the cross for you, the fact that you don't seem to care at all makes me want to spit you up and out of my mouth. Beware, Christ follower. The monster of indifference is dangerous. In these next few verses, he talks about the primary cause of spiritual indifference. What causes it in your life and in mine? And I think what we're going to see here is it's the illusion of self-sufficiency. The fact that we rely on ourselves and not on God. So let's look at what he says in verse 17. He says, you say, I am rich. I have everything I want. I don't need a thing. In other words, I got all I need. You say that, church. You've acquired wealth. You're this great city who has a banking industry, and you think you don't need anything. But Jesus, then he says, and you don't realize that you're wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. You don't realize what you think you have. You think that's what you need, but you're missing what matters the most. And I find this attitude so prevalent in our culture today. Whenever I have an opportunity to talk to someone about spiritual matters, maybe they're locked in as a prisoner next to me in an airplane, or we're at the gym or something, and we get to bring up the subject, and the subject comes up. I hear this all the time. Yeah, I'm good. I don't need that. I'm good. I got my car. I got my iPhone. Even got it upgraded. I got my Netflix. I'm good. I'm good. I don't need anything. And Jesus is saying, you have all of this stuff, this material stuff, but you're spiritually void. You're full of things in the world, but you're lacking what truly matters. And why is it we're so drawn to the things of this world, and the things of this world never, ever satisfy? How you doing? I'm good. I got everything I need. You think you have what you need, but you have no idea. You're wretched, Jesus says, pitiful, poor, blind, naked. You're full of stuff, but spiritually bankrupt. And it's robbing you of intimacy with me. And it's just an illusion of self-sufficiency. And we see that just so much in the world today. And especially in our part of the world that you live in, what I see is that people have just a little bit of Jesus. Just enough to make them comfortable, just enough to make them feel good, just enough to make them go to church every now and then, just enough to try to give something to help somebody else in need, but not enough to follow him every day with passion and fire. So lukewarm indifference doesn't just rob us of intimacy with God, it brings him intense displeasure. It makes him want to vomit. And we're going to get to the rest of those verses in a minute, but I want to stop here and just talk about something. How do we know if we're living with this type of indifference? How do we know? Well, as I studied this, I kind of wrote down 6 things that I thought, with my experience, which is over 30 years in ministry and dealing with people as well as myself, these, I think, are indicators of spiritual indifference. So if you're taking notes, I want you to write these down. Here's the first one. We're more concerned with impressing people than living for God. We're more concerned with impressing people than living for God. We're more concerned with what everybody else thinks about us. Am I popular? Do I blend in? Do you like my hair? Do you like my shoes? Do you like my music? Are we cool? Are we all right? See, we're obsessed with what people think, and we forget about what God thinks. I think it was Timothy who said, in the end times, there will be people who are lovers of themselves and not lovers of God. We're so concerned, lovers of self. Do you like my selfie? Make sure you like it. Make sure you follow me. We're so concerned about what other people think about us that we can never, ever be completely living for what God thinks about us. Number 2, we're obsessed with life on earth rather than eternity in heaven. It's all about things that we have now, getting things now. And the problem is, Scripture says, if you love the world, the love of the Father is not in you. If you got to have all this stuff, and there's nothing wrong with stuff, it's when it comes in between you and your relationship with God that it's bad. And we know we're spiritually indifferent when we're obsessed with what we have in this life rather than the next. See, if there's no margin in our finances to give and invest in eternity, then we're obsessed with the world and the things the world has to offer us. That's how we know we're spiritually indifferent. Number 3, we rationalize sin and we live without truly fearing God. We rationalize sin. In our culture, we try to rename it to make it something better. It's not pornography. It's adult entertainment. It's not adultery. It's an affair. And we rationalize. And we say, you know what? I may have this problem with this sin, but I'm not as bad as he is. I'm not as bad as she is. And we rationalize that sin away. And we don't truly fear God for what sin does and the price that he paid to forgive that sin. We rationalize our sin without truly fearing God. Number 4, we believe in Jesus, but we rarely share our faith. We believe in Jesus, but we rarely share our faith. As Christ followers, we go, you know what? I already have him, so it's okay. I already have him. I don't really need to invite anybody else to his goodness. And see, we talked about this subject in our last series when we talked about how God has this story he's invited us into for us to have a story and to share that story. We even gave you a tool with the palm of your hand to use to share that story. But I think the problem is, I don't know that we really believe the gospel is true because we don't share it. We don't let our light shine. That's spiritual indifference. Number 5, we only turn to God when we need him. We only turn to God when we need him. Rather than seeking him daily, we seek him when he benefits us. He's like a tool in our toolbox. Oh, God, I got a problem here. Can you help me out with this? And God comes and helps us. And then after he's done, we say, okay, let's put that back in the toolbox. And then we need him later. Oh, my gosh, God, somebody's sick. Can you help? Can you heal? And God comes in, and then we put him right back on the shelf. We only turn to him when we need him. That's spiritual indifference. And then number 6, ultimately, we end up recognizing that we're not much different than the world. We're not much different than the world. We're entertained the way everybody else is entertained. We watch the same movies the world watches. We listen to the same music the world listens to. We live by the same values the world lives by. We raise our children the same way the world does. And we wake up and go, you know what? What's different about me other than I call myself a Christian? So what's the answer? How can we keep from being spiritually indifferent? And I believe Jesus gives us the answer in the next few verses. So let's look at what Jesus has to say about this. In verse 18, he says, so I advise you to buy gold from me, gold that has been purified by fire, then you will be rich. Now remember, one of the big things about Laodicea was what? The banking industry. They were a very wealthy city. So much so that evidently Christ saw through all that and said, you know what? You're depending way too much on your wealth and not on me. So he says, here's some advice. Buy gold from me. Don't put your trust and security in money. Put your trust and security in me. Buy gold from me. Then you will be rich. The riches of following Christ are far greater than material prosperity. And then he says, also, buy white garments from me so that you will not be shamed by your nakedness. And this is an interesting thing, particularly because at the time, Laodicea was well known for its textile industry. But in particular, they were known for their black wool. You remember that song you used to sing in nursery school? Bye, bye, black sheep, have you any wool? They had figured out a way, I'm not sure if they had done it by breeding or whatever, but this black wool, the rich loved it, and they spent lots of money on it. But on the other side of the coin, people wanted white wool because white wool could be dyed any color that you wanted. And so Jesus looks at them and says, what? You're known for your textiles. You're known for your black wool. I want you to buy white garments from me. What's white garments? White garments are pure, clean garments. So you'll not be shamed by your nakedness. I can provide a raiment of righteousness for you. And then he continues, and ointment for your eyes so you will be able to see. And guess what? Laodicea, I said earlier, was known for its medical school and its school of ophthalmology. They had come up with a nard ointment to treat the ears and the eyes. And Jesus speaks into their culture and says, you know what, guys? You are spiritually blind to what you need to see. If you will, let me put ointment on your eyes spiritually so that I can open them and you can see what you really need to see, that you can see people the way I see people, and you see eternity the way I see eternity, and you see things the way I see things. I can help you see what you really need to see. And then in verse 19, he says this, I correct and discipline everyone I love. In other words, church, I love you even though you're spiritually indifferent, but I love you too much to let you stay there. Therefore, I'll do whatever it takes to correct you, to discipline you, to get you to do all of these things, to buy gold from me, white raiment from me, ointment for your eyes. And then he says this, so be diligent and turn from what? Your indifference. Turn from your indifference. And if you will turn from your indifference, here's the result and here's the promise. And you might want to circle this verse in your Bible. He says, look, verse 20, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends. There's nothing more intimate than gathering around the table with family and friends, right? We're going to get to do that here in a few weeks, Thanksgiving and holidays. Last night, I did a wedding for one of our families, married their daughter, and we got to sit at tables for dinner. And we had no control over where we sat. They did that, right? But it just so happened we got to sit with some people that we knew, but we hadn't seen in a while. One of those was Danny and Pam Ramsey. You remember Danny, who almost broke our stage when he sang up here? You remember Danny? And we got to catch up with him. They've moved to Brenham and how they love Bluebell even more now and all that stuff. We got to talk about their kids. And then we talked to another couple that we knew. Actually got to meet him for the first time. She had gone through a horrible divorce earlier in the year and told us a story of how they found each other. They were high school sweethearts, and they found each other again. And it was just a wonderful time of intimacy around a table with family and friends, telling stories and keeping up with what the kids are doing and the grandkids and all those things. There's just something about that setting that is so intimate. And Jesus is saying, look, that's the same kind of intimacy I want with you, where we can just sit and talk as friends. But spiritual indifference robs us of that intimacy. And not only that, it makes God sick at his stomach. Brings him intense displeasure. So he says, if you will turn from your indifference, your relationship with God can go to a whole new level of intimacy. And instead of being consumed with what people think about you, you'll be more consumed about what God thinks about you. And instead of rationalizing sin, you'll find yourself confessing it to God and being honest to God and finding the forgiveness that you so desperately need. Instead of living for the temporary, the things, the stuff, we'll suddenly find that we need to invest in eternity, and we start thinking about eternal things. And suddenly, because of that change, the passion comes back, and suddenly the light begins to shine, and people see that light, and we become bold, and we're able to share our story and share our faith with people because we believe the passion of the gospel is true. God loves you, has a wonderful plan for your life. This is what he's done for me. And we do something about it. And suddenly, we're not just turning to God when we need him, but we're turning to him every single day through the good and through the bad and bringing him glory. And then we wake up and we realize, you know what? I am different. We are different, Christ follower. We're supposed to be different. We're different from the world. Paul said we're strangers here. We're aliens here. We're different. So, Christ follower, beware of the monster of indifference. It robs you of your intimacy with God, and it literally makes him sick. So I want to challenge you today. He's knocking at your door. He wants in. He wants in badly. He wants intimacy worse than you do. But you have to open the door. He doesn't force his way in. You ever seen that picture of Jesus knocking on the door that somebody's drawn? Next time you look at it, notice that there is no handle on the outside. It's on the inside. He doesn't force his way in. The Christ follower, he's knocking because he's talking to the church here. He's talking to you and me. I want to come in. I want to be intimate with you. And if we'll let him in, that passion that you once had will come back. Let me just say this. If today you can look back and there was a time, whether it was a week ago, a month ago, a years ago, that you were closer to God than you are now, guess what? The monster of indifference has begun to settle in. And he wants intimacy with you, Christ follower. And listen, if you're spiritually indifferent today because you've never established a relationship with Christ, he's knocking on your door too. He's saying, I want to come in. I want to forgive you of your sin. That's what I died on the cross for. I want to give you meaning and purpose in life, the abundant life that I talked about in John 10:10. And I want to give you eternity. That's why I rose from the dead. But you have to open the door.